Welcome to the Atheist Nun channel, a show aimed to inspire readers to cherish the most meaningful moments found in life by learning about secular morality. Subscribe for more content on aspects of my business and writing life, as well as topics concerning ethics, mid-19th century living, etiquette, and much more. A friend brought this interview between Tucker Carlson and Brian Johnson to my attention, and once the two gentlemen started delving into the ethics of living forever, I found myself shouting at the screen, "Objectivism!" I could not help myself, and I needed an outlet to vent. So, seeing as I have an audience on the internet who is willing to listen to me, I am going to share the interview along with my commentary scattered throughout. I will list the timestamps for the Carlson interview in the description box below if you're curious about rewatching certain parts of the interview. This is the first time I've made content like this, so let me know down in the comment section if you liked it. All right, time to get this interview started. The first 10 minutes or so consist of just some background on who Brian Johnson is in case you have never heard of him or his work before. Tucker Carlson, of course, is the famous former Fox News host who now has his own video podcast show called The Tucker Carlson Encounter.
So it is the most basic truth of biology that the second you reach maturity, you exit adolescence and become an adult, you start dying, you degrade, and then you expire. This is called the aging process, and you maybe first start noticing it in your 40s, long after it's already begun, because there are visible symptoms. You get wrinkly and bald, and if you can't stay away from the pizza, you get a little fat. And that's kind of inevitable, or we have been told it's inevitable. But a man called Brian Johnson has decided it's not necessarily inevitable. He was a very large figure in the tech world, made a ton of dough, and then started thinking about his body and the nature of life and the future of human existence, and has become pretty famous recently for saying that he has, in a way, begun to reverse the aging process and maybe even cracked the code that limits the human lifespan. But watch him explain.
It's hard to believe tech millionaire Brian Johnson is 46 years old. But no matter his chronological age, he's striving for the biological age of an 18-year-old. His team of 30 doctors utilize all the latest tech. The plan is rigorous. At $2 million a year, a life like this is out of reach for almost everyone.
And this is what I take on a daily basis of supplements. It's alphabetized, and we have a year's supply of everything we do.
He calls his all-encompassing protocol Project Blueprint.
Blueprint was born out of trying to fix my own problems, but then taking care of my family, my kids and my parents, my friends.
It's generated a steady churn of shock headlines. He once injected himself with his son's plasma. It's part of his quest to live forever, which he believes may happen in our lifetime.
Seems a little spooky, but also interesting. And we're doing this interview because one of our smartest friends suggested it. You gotta talk to this guy, Brian Johnson. He's genuinely interesting. And he seems to be. He is the founder and CEO, among other companies, a company called Kernel that creates devices that can monitor brain activity. And he joins us now on set. Brian, great to see you.
Great to see you as well. Thanks for having me.
So I've got a bunch of different questions, some practical, some philosophical. Let's start with the practical ones. How old are you, 46?
46.
46. You don't look it, I will say, famously. So how, as a practical matter, what's your regimen for slowing or reversing the aging process?
What we do is we measure every organ of my body, my heart, my lungs, my liver, my pancreas, my brain, and we biologically age each organ. So you say, how old is the heart? So even though I'm 46, my heart is 37. My left ear is 64. My lung capacity is age 18. My cardiovascular capacity is the top 1.5% of 18-year-olds. And so you need to know where your baseline is. And so we've measured my entire body. I've become the most measured person in history. And once you have all those numbers, then you can go to therapies and say, can you slow the speed of aging? And can you reverse the aging damage that has happened? And that's been the project for the past 3 years.
And you can, you think?
You can, yeah. For example, I slowed my speed of aging. So inside your body, there's a clock with how fast you're aging. And that clock is determined by DNA methylation. I've reduced my speed of aging by the equivalent of 31 years. So I now age, in a more generalized way to say it, 7.6 months for every 12 months that pass.
Okay.
So I get the remaining months for free, which is I've slowed down my speed of aging. So the damage that accumulates in my body is much slower. And so we've done this through diet and exercise and sleep and a bunch of other therapies. But yes, we can quantifiably measure how fast my aging, what are the age of my organs, and then we can use therapies to go about it. And so we do everything according to science and data. This is not me offering an opinion. This is my entire body on display for the world of what happens when you apply the world's best science into a body.
So I'm assuming you quit smoking.
Yeah, I never started, but
You never started. Okay, okay, good. So that's like step one, quit smoking.
Exactly
okay,
right.
Fine. Just to make sure we have that on the record. What specifically do you eat?
I have 3 meals a day. So breakfast is broccoli, cauliflower, black lentils, garlic, and ginger. The next meal of the day is pea protein, pomegranate juice, macadamia nuts, walnuts, flaxseed, sunflower lecithin. And the final meal of the day is berries, nuts, fruits.
Okay. So pizza and Oreos totally out.
Yeah, they are not in supply at the house.
So why? Like if you could narrow down the foods that actually do reduce your lifespan and the quality of your life, what would they be?
Yeah, what we tried to do with the diet is we said, if you take the frame that every calorie you put into your body has to fight for its life, what would that be? And so we went through, we referenced all the scientific literature. We said, what has the best evidence? And then we put it into my body, then we measure. So if a given thing is supposed to do a thing in the body, it stays. And if it does it, it stays. If not, it's out. And so what I told you is that where every calorie is precisely designed. And these are population level studies. This is not just me. Could be applicable to you as well.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, we are very particular about what goes into my body, and not a single calorie goes in that's not backed by science.
What are the ones you definitely would not eat, like period?
Basically the standard American diet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's bad.
It's really, I knew it was bad. Like we all know it's bad. I didn't know how bad. Like once you understand the biochemical processes of what happens in your body when you eat these things, it's awful.
Like what?
I mean, it increases your speed of aging. Like you've got this clock and it's saying how fast until disease develops or something goes wrong. And this clock just, it will increase if you don't eat the right things. If you eat the right things, it will slow down. The wrong things speed it up.
Let me just push you a little more on this question. So like, what are the things you just would not put in your mouth specifically?
Pizza, donuts, junk food, fast food, processed food.
Pizza is number one.
Yeah, I don't eat red meat. I'm vegan, but nothing against meat, so people can add meat to their diet. But like red meat is not at the top of the things that makes the cut for science of wanting to extend life.
Interesting. How much time do you spend exercising?
1 hour a day.
That's it.
Yeah.
What do you do?
Cardiovascular, weights, and stretching.
So would it be fair to say that someone who followed your diet and your exercise regimen would have similar effects to the ones you've enjoyed?
Yes. So I've done this. I've made my entire project open source. It's for free for everybody. I post my data, my recipes, my processes, my therapies. Everything is shared with everyone. And so tens of thousands of people around the world are doing this, and they're seeing remarkable results. So I've tried to reduce what I do into very simple things that are affordable for everybody.
Those would not include injecting yourself with your son's blood, right?
That's right.
Okay. Why'd you do that?
So we were looking into therapy. So the way we approached Blueprint is we said, so what humans have generated a lot of science over the past couple decades. And we said, let's take all the science, let's rank them according to power laws of the best science ever done. Let's grade the evidence. Then we'll see what we can apply from those into my body. And plasma infusions were one that was interesting. And so I was looking at it myself. And one day I was talking to my dad and he said, I need to tell you, I had this really scary situation where he's in the legal profession. He said, I wrote a brief. I walked away. I came back and I saw that my words were a jumbled mess. I was experiencing cognitive lapse and I wasn't aware of it. He's 71. He said, I'm terrified of losing my mind.
Yes.
And I said, Dad, how interesting that you bring this up, because right now the team and I are talking about plasma infusions and that some of the studies are looking at the effects on Alzheimer's and Parkinson's and other kinds of things like that. And so I said, if you're interested, I'm happy to give you a liter of my plasma. And then my 17-year-old son was there and he's like, hey, if you guys are doing it, I'm in. Right, great, we'll make this a family affair. And so my son...
Sharing the plasma.
Yeah, so my son gave me a liter of plasma. I gave my dad a liter of plasma. And The data showed that in me, there was no effect, that my biomarkers didn't change. But in my dad, his speed of aging reduced by 25 years. So he was aging at the rate of a 71-year-old. And after the plasma infusion and continued for 6 months, it lessened to a 45-year-old. So his clock dramatically slowed down.
Interesting. Did he feel better?
He did. And his colleagues were saying, what's up? This is, you're hot, you're on fire. What's happening?
And it was plasma from his son.
It was the only therapy that he did.
Does it need to be a blood relative?
No, it just blood typed.
Okay, so now we're getting into the theories about taking the blood of children.
I mean, so this is very common. We do organ transplants. We all donate blood. Like, we've had that experience in our life. So it's just in a slightly different frame, but it's very much a part of.
Well, it's a recognizable frame. And by the way, I'm not endorsing any of this.
Yeah.
By the way, I'm not endorsing any of this. Carlson will repeat this phrase because he does not agree with Brian's anti-aging methods. Hold this in mind as we get deeper into the interview.
But there is a frame, to use your word, on the internet of like super rich tech billionaires living forever on the blood of children.
Yeah.
Not a super appealing frame, I would say.
Yeah.
This is that.
Yeah, and we did it openly. We made a video out of it. We made fun of it. We made a meme out of it. So yeah, this is how we've done the entire project. Is everything's open sourced. It's always discussed. We share all the data. But yes, it definitely feeds into many of the there's a lot of theories about what happens behind the scenes with rich people.
Yeah, and not all of them seem baseless, I guess.
Tucker begins by attacking Project Blueprint with the skepticism one would find among Democrats who distrust rich people. He says the rich feed off the blood of children, and that clearly does alarm Tucker, even though he is a millionaire himself. You may feel like this is an obvious concern people have brought up, but later on in the video, it will become more apparent that this method really rubs Tucker the wrong way.
That's what a lot of people said. Is like, we finally got a glimpse. So you're showing us what's happening.
Kind of. Yeah, like the tech oligarch taking the blood of children. Yeah, I'm just.
Yeah.
Interesting. So I wonder, as I was reading about you, the effect on you and your life. Like, what's it like to focus on your body that much?
Yeah. Oh, I love it. It's there's one thing about building a product. Like, we oftentimes think of our work as our immortality. What we produce in our careers, our reputation, our accomplishments. And when you think about it this way, you are the product. You are your own best creation. And so it's been energizing. I've loved being consumed by it. I think that, it's one of the happiest endeavors I've done in my life.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
I've taken the opposite approach, and I'm not claiming it's superior to yours, but I had my appendix swell up and burst, and I had it, of course, taken out. I never asked like what the appendix is because I didn't really want to know. I don't know what a spleen is. Like, I've really made an effort to not focus on those things because it seems like a lot of self-focus, and it seems like a short trip from there to, say, narcissism, which is obviously death. So
Brian Johnson says, you are the product. And as someone who is as religious as you will see Tucker is, this freaks him out. So his response is so telling. I never asked what the appendix is. I really made an effort not to focus on those things because it seems like a lot of self-focus. And it seems like a short trip from there to, say, narcissism, which is obviously death. Wow. You know, as I was listening to this interview, I learned a lot more about how Christians view this world that I could not have even fathomed before, having left my Protestant upbringing by 11. It seems impossible for me to believe that people would avoid asking what is wrong when their body malfunctions. I spent all day reading and writing and consuming videos to discover the truth of things, to understand my body and this world, all day long. So to outright reject thinking about your own appendix because that seems selfish to a Christian is downright medieval thinking. It's frightening to hear, honestly. Throughout this interview, pay attention to how concerned and brainwashed Tucker Carlson is in his faith and its utter obsession with their notion of selfishness. He is constantly equating what should be the virtue of selfishness, as Rand calls it, or the ego and the self-esteem that follows with narcissism, death, and the devil. Okay, let's move on.
So are you worried about that?
My observation really is philosophical. I did this thought experiment where when I was 21, I came back from Ecuador. I had lived among extreme poverty for 2 years, and I had this burning
You're
desire.
on a Mormon mission.
On a Mormon mission, yeah.
Yes.
And I had this burning desire to be useful to the world. I didn't know what or how. And so I thought I'll make a whole bunch of money by age of 30. And then when I'm 30 years old and have a whole bunch of money, I'll decide what to do then. And so I've been searching for this mission my entire life. And upon doing that, I organized dinners with my smartest friends. And I said, let's imagine we're existing in 2050. And this was 2016 at the time. And the world is amazing. What did we do in 2016 that would make that possible? And then I listened very intently to everybody's responses. And then I put them in a box. And I made a rule that I can't do anything inside that box. I have to do something outside that box. And what nobody was working on was trying to solve death. That it was always inconceivable that you could try to legitimately conquer death. And that's what I set my sight on.
Now, Brian Johnson reveals his upbringing in Mormonism, which he didn't actually leave until his 30s. And now, much like Descartes, he lost his trust in everything, most unfortunately, the trust in his mind. This is just as corrupt as thinking that God is in control of your life by believing that only the chemical squirtings in your body are in control of your life and not your rational mind. He also places death as the centerpiece of his newfound philosophical system. The enemy is death, and it must be defeated. Now, I must say here that I also feel that my greatest enemy here on earth is death. But the philosophy of objectivism is not based on that premise, rather one of happiness as the end goal. Objectivists are moving toward a positive and not focused with fear on constantly running away from a negative.
But what's interesting, I mean, now, okay, so we're at the philosophical part of this, and my friend who recommended this interview said, he's really interesting on the practical stuff, the serum transfers and all that, but he's much more interesting on the philosophical questions, and I think you will be. So let me ask, you grew up in a Mormon world, that believed and taught you that it had already solved the question of death.
Exactly.
Through Jesus.
Exactly.
You no longer think that.
It would be helpful if there was some evidence.
Yeah. Okay. So you've abandoned that worldview, or at least you're agnostic, I guess would be the word on that worldview. Right. Not to get too personal, but I'm just interested because a lot of people would say, religious people, Christians would say, well, we've already solved death.
Right.
Don't need to solve that. It's solved. But there's also, of course, no evidence that eternal life is possible in a corporal sense, physical sense.
Right.
Because it's never been done. So what gives you faith that you can do it?
Yeah. If you look at the speed in which artificial intelligence is advancing, we are gaining new abilities we've never had before in every domain of society. You pair that with our ability that we now, in this moment, we can predictably design biology and the physical world, atom by atom. You bring those things together, for the first time in human history, one can say with a straight face that we may be able to go after death. Now, I'm not saying we can, I'm not saying it's guaranteed. I'm saying that it is rational and reasonable and supported by where the realities are today. And so with what I've been trying to do is to show a glimmer of hope that, because what I'm really trying to do is demonstrate age escape velocity. That is, so when 1 year of time passes, I remain the same biological age. So we're never going to arrest aging altogether. But if let's say I age 0.4, and then I can reverse that 0.4 with therapies and stay the same age biologically. Right now, I'm 0.64. So I've already started at 1, and I'm all the way down to 0.64. If we keep on inching down, it might change everything. It's one thing to have a philosophical conversation. It's another thing to say, I can be youthful and have energy and feel great. I think everybody wants that.
100%. Live long and prosper, for
yes.
sure. And that seems like a virtuous goal. And what you're doing to that extent is virtuous.
Tucker says you grew up in a world, a Mormon world, that believed and taught you that it had already solved the question of death through Jesus. This was probably the biggest shock to me while watching this video podcast. I suppose having left the religion so early that Christians in general believe that the resurrection of Jesus was actually him conquering death, the devil, and allowing us all to have eternal life in heaven. I just have never believed that anyone had solved death before. It certainly does not feel solved when you are watching your own mother die so young from the horrible jaws of cancer. That feels like a devilish act that she should have been saved from, no? At least Brian Johnson has the guts to tell Tucker Carlson that he would like evidence of such a thing existing, and that the speed at which artificial intelligence is growing may be our single way out of dying. I agree that the idea of age escape velocity is much more plausible at this point than the idea of there being any sort of afterlife. Tucker says that what Brian Johnson is doing to that extent is virtuous. But just wait.
I just wonder if, as someone who grew up in a religious community, if part of you, maybe deep inside, fears that when you start to say things like, we can defeat death, that you won't be smote down by the God of the universe.
Yeah.
For assuming
Yeah.
his role.
Yeah.
Do you worry about that?
Not in the least bit. Never crossed my
Well, you're
mind.
either very brave or very foolish.
I just wonder if, as someone who grew up in a religious community, if part of you maybe deep inside fears that when you start to say things like, we can defeat death, that you won't be smoked down by the God of the universe. Again, wow. Tucker Carlson truly lives his life in fear like a child, worried about getting coal on Christmas from Santa Claus. It boggles my mind that adults can still carry this same childlike mentality into their middle and old age. Brian's reply of not in the least bit was refreshing to hear, but not the Harris-like cackle from Tucker. This man thinks that Brian is a fool, and it does not come from a good place in his soul, as he responds with, well, you're either very brave or very foolish.
Never crossed my mind.
Really? So
Yeah.
when you say, I can defeat death, aren't you saying I'm God?
I'm saying that the universe speaks in irony,
That's for sure.
and that the story we've told is that God created us, and the actual story may be that we are going to create God.
What kind of God?
This is the question we face as a species. I mean, right now we have organized society around capitalism. We strive to make money, have power and wealth. We engage in warfare. You know, everyone's angling for their best interest. And I'm suggesting that this is not about me trying to live forever. This is me trying to answer the most pressing question in existence. What do we do as a species? Now, when death is inevitable, you're going to have an answer like, well, I'm going to live fast and die young, or I'm going to conquer territories and be immortal for my quest, or I'm going to make up your meaning of life game. But if death is not inevitable, we can extend our lifespans to some unknown horizon, the meaning-making games we have as a species all change.
Of course.
And that's what I'm suggesting, where this moment is that.
Take note that Tucker Carlson will increasingly howl in laughter, more like Harris, when he gets uncomfortable. Tucker then asks, aren't you saying I'm God? To which Brian responds with an odd response of, I'm saying that the universe speaks in irony. What? Here is where I started shouting, objectivism! The universe, as Leonard Peikoff, Ayn Rand's intellectual heir, says, is the total of that which exists. Not merely the Earth or the stars or the galaxies, but everything. Obviously, there can be no such thing as the cause of the universe. Is the universe then unlimited in size? No. Everything which exists is finite, including the universe. What then, you ask, is outside of the universe, if it is finite? This question is invalid. The phrase outside of the universe has no referent. The universe is everything. Outside the universe stands for that which is where everything isn't. There is no such place. There isn't even nothing out there. There is no out there. So the universe does not have a consciousness like me or you. It is simply everything in existence. Therefore, it cannot be ironic, since that is a man-made term. It just is. There is a process to the natural world, but that is also not ironic. So if Brian Johnson or Tucker Carlson had cared to ever read more than some smatterings of Ayn Rand's fiction, then they would have better answers than from a Christian or a hippie perspective, as revealed throughout this interview.
I mean, many people through history have reached similar conclusions, but not with similar technology to affect those conclusions, right? So, or those outcomes. But, history laughs at those people, and the story of history is men addled with hubris being humiliated.
Yes.
And so, I mean, I would say there's a great deal of evidence that you will be crushed and humiliated for saying that. Just based, and I hope that's not the case, of course, but every other living person who's reached the conclusion that you've reached has been crushed and humiliated in the end, and we laugh at them. So what makes you different?
This is shocking. Many people through history have reached similar conclusions, but not with similar technology to affect those conclusions, right? But history laughs at those people, and the story of history is men addled with hubris being humiliated. Notice the slight cynical smile here. And so, I would say that there is a great deal of evidence that you will be crushed and humiliated for saying that. Wow, wow, wow. This is a medieval mind telling you and me to just watch your loved ones suffer and die with a pitiful clasp of the hands and the sigh of resignation that it must have been their time. If I love my mother, then I will fight death for her. I will understand the kind of cancer she got and how she could have avoided such outcomes, if any. I would feel an anger in my soul that I could not save her. I would advocate for the scientists of today, since I admit my strengths lie more in the arts than the sciences, to find the cure for all diseases. I will never give up the control I have in my power to fight death. History is created by the intellectual minority. Just as a man's actions are preceded and determined by some form of idea in his mind, so a society's existential conditions are preceded and determined by the ascendancy of a certain philosophy among those whose job is to deal with ideas. The events of any given period of history are the result of the thinking of the preceding period. The 19th century, with its political freedom, science, industry, business, trade, all the necessary conditions of material progress, was the result and the last achievement of the intellectual power released by the Renaissance. The men engaged in those activities were still riding on the remnants of an Aristotelian influence in philosophy, particularly on an Aristotelian epistemology, more implicitly than explicitly. Would you rather, Tucker, have men of the mind engage in experiments that are not always successful, or would you like to live like the isolated African tribes that still exist today, dying from things that we have been preventing for hundreds of years at this point? Would you rather cheer on the scholar and the businessman like Brian Johnson who take these ideas from the realm of ideas to reality? I thought you advocated for capitalism, but you sound more and more like the anti-colonial left here.
Yeah, I think it's likely inevitable that I will die the most ironic death. That is guaranteed to happen.
That
right?
is so true. By the way, that's the message of the New Testament. That's the Sermon on the Mount.
Yeah.
It's the irony
Yes.
book.
Yes.
The first will be last. The meek shall inherit the earth.
Exactly.
Like, no, you're.
So I will.
We agree on that.
I'll get hit by a bus, or I will choke taking a pill, or
You'll die of a broccoli OD.
Yeah, exactly. So it's guaranteed to happen. So me aside, I think
Okay, now I like you a lot. I think that's just a wonderful thing to say. You're right. That is wisdom.
It's guaranteed to happen. And so hopefully this lives past me. But I think if you have do another thought experiment with me. Let's imagine we're hanging out in the 25th century. We're listening to what they're saying about the early 21st century. Now, in the same way we look at the 15th century, we compress that entire century into 10 things. 15 things.
Yes, that's right.
99% of what happened then is just washed away.
Of course.
We don't care. It's just 1%.
And there's no record of it either.
Exactly.
Yes.
And this moment, the same is going to be true. We have more recording, of course, of our existence.
Yes.
They did, but we're still going to be compressed in time. And so 99% of what we do will be washed away. There'll be a small fraction that actually matters to future generations.
Yes.
And so if you ask
Or
that
they'll
question,
even know about or have any way of knowing about.
or they'll care about.
Yes, that's
And
right.
so if you pose that question from the 25th century, and so that really, for me, creates this clarity of thought. Like if you try to really clear your head of all the noise happening now, what did they say right now that we did as a species in this moment that allowed intelligence to thrive in this part of the galaxy?
Poor Brian starts to allow the naysayers to get to him by saying, I think it's likely inevitable that I will die the most ironic death. And there goes the Tucker cackle with such joy. He says, yes, that is so true. By the way, that's the message of the New Testament. I mean, that's the Sermon on the Mount. It's the irony book. At this point, I'm fuming. I have seen so many comments under Brian Johnson's own videos saying such nihilistic things as, well, it would be hilariously ironic if you got hit by a truck right now. As if people want to trolley problem their own existence when they make comments like this. But who bases their values, their moral system, on accidents? What about the choices you make on a daily basis that may have put you in those situations in the first place? I think it is cruel and a sign of depression to think this way. That it is not worth trying to stay alive because accidents happen, not to mention that most accidents are not fatal. We have all fallen off our bike while learning to ride one, and how many children out of that were run over by a truck? I mean, really, this is to me a nihilistic and liberal mindset at its core. If Brian Johnson knew about Ayn Rand, then he would never kowtow before these ridiculous premises. Okay, now I like you a lot. I think that's just a wonderful thing to say. That is wisdom. What? I am so sick to my stomach hearing this in 2024 and not 1424.
And this is what I would say is this is when Homo sapiens realized that they reached a technological threshold where the only objective of existence was to continue to exist at the basic level. So this is don't die. That when we're on the eve of giving birth to superintelligence, and we have to ask all the basic questions of our existence. Who are we? Why do we exist? How do we operate in society? Do I have a job? Do I don't? Like, what are the answers to these basic questions? And what I'm suggesting is our existence is going to be compressed into one statement we can all say, which is don't die. And don't die is the most played game by everybody on planet Earth every second of every day. We breathe every few seconds. We look both ways before we cross the street. We throw out moldy food. So don't die is played more than capitalism. Don't die is played more than religion. The most played game in existence. And that's the thing we can rally behind in this moment.
It's interesting, though. I mean, the fact that I think that's partly true, but the fact that you have to articulate it suggests it's not entirely true. In other words, the way that human beings differ from other animal species is not just language and the opposable thumb. It's that humans are the only animal that kill themselves. That need to be convinced that life is worth living.
Yeah.
And I wonder what you make of that. I don't have the answer to that.
Yeah.
I don't know why, but that has always struck me as the main distinction between people and, say, dogs or pigs or horses or any other animal. Why? Or monkeys, for that matter. Why? Why do people kill themselves? Why do they need to be convinced not to die?
Yeah, in some ways, we're brilliant. In many ways, we are idiotic and insane. Like I had this problem where I would overeat every night at 7 p.m. To deal with the stresses of the day. I would eat too much food, junk food. I was 60 pounds heavier than I am now. Why did I do that? Why did I inflict this harm upon myself every night? And afterwards, I'd say, I'm changing tomorrow. This is my last day, no more. But I did it anyways. I just couldn't stop myself from these self-destructive behaviors. It's such a weird thing. And so now what I did is
But hold on, what do you make of that? I mean, and every person has experienced that, whether it's drinking or sex or food is very, very common in this country. But why does that happen? Because it kind of puts a lie to to use your term frame again, to the evolutionary biology frame that we use to explain human behavior.
Yes.
Like, right?
Yes.
Why do we act against ourselves? And is it us acting against ourselves, or is it a force outside of ourselves acting on us? Like, so what's the answer?
Agreed. And we treat planet Earth the same way we treat our own bodies.
Of course.
we treat each other.
But why?
Exactly.
I mean, I understand. Look, evolutionary biology, common sense explains why I might hurt you.
Yeah.
To steal your stuff.
Exactly.
And to make it more likely that, my kids reproduce and my line continues. I mean, it's not hard. It's wrong, but it's understandable. Why do I hurt myself in ways that don't bring me pleasure, that are purely destructive? You can see why people believe in demons.
Yeah.
I don't think you do believe in demons. So what do you believe? What is that?
This is when Homo sapiens realized that they reached a technological threshold where the only objective of existence was to continue to exist at the basic level. So this is don't die. Again, in this Descartes way of viewing the world, the objective of existence does not really make sense. Ayn Rand says that existence exists. It is here metaphysical and the first pillar of objectivism. It is just reality itself. So the question naturally becomes, well, the objective of existence for whom? Brian says Homo sapiens, but we require so much more than existing that's not living. A depressed person, as Tucker points out, who is simply existing is not going to wish to live long and has the ability to consciously off themselves, unlike any other species. We want to be happy, and that can only be achieved by living according to the laws of nature, reality. I think Tucker, being as religious as he is, realizes that there is something hollow about just not dying when he believes we have souls, and apparently demons too.
Yeah, I mean, on this question, there's probably many answers on why. The solution that I've come up with is I endeavored to build an algorithm that could take better care of me than I can myself.
But you still have to follow it, and you still you have to want to build it. So, but you're eliding over, and I am too. I don't have the answer. I don't want to pretend that I do.
Brian Johnson does not have any answers as to why people harm themselves without Ayn Rand's help. Instead, he says that the solution that I've come up with is I endeavor to build an algorithm that could take better care of me than I can myself, which completely negates human free will and a need for any sort of moral code in that case. I do not think an algorithm can make men happy. Again, working from Descartes-like premises, Brian Johnson does not trust anything around him, including his mind. He thinks people act insane, even though we know from a legal perspective that proving actual insanity, a total divorce from reality at the time of committing a crime, is extremely rare. Just like the trolley problems, we cannot base the actions of humanity off rare states of psychosis. People make decisions every day to eat poorly or not exercise. They must learn about what they are doing to their bodies and then use their willpower to fight against the temptations, just as Brian Johnson has done himself, without acknowledging all that his mind has actually done toward the betterment of his life. I think this utter blindness he is experiencing in his middle age comes back to his long journey with Mormonism. He simply has not read enough outside of the religion that shaped his thinking, and neither has Tucker Carlson, as they run around like headless chickens without an answer as to why people still harm themselves. Again, allow me to yell, read Ayn Rand.
I think they're clearly demonic forces. I think they're evil spirits that are doing this to people. That's my view. That's my view. But so I've kind of explained it without any evidence at all other than noticing. But it seems to me that you have to explain it too. Like, what is that? Yeah. How could we ever knowingly act against our own interest? Where do those compulsions come from? You say they're biological. What does that even mean? It doesn't mean anything. What is the answer?
I don't know the answer. I would suggest it's a flaw.
Yeah.
And I would suggest that this is what we will solve with our technology.
But it still requires the decision, which is a conscious decision, that that's a good thing, that's preferable to self-destruction.
Yeah. Sometimes though, like think of this like Ozempic. So let's just set aside side effect profile. Let's set aside any of those questions. If I can take a pill that turns off my hunger, I don't have to be fat anymore, I'm in.
Well, but if you're approaching, I mean, that's a whole separate conversation. But if you're approaching it logically, you couldn't turn off the data of, as I think you put, the side effect profile. Like, what's the downside? That's part of the calculation, is it not?
Yeah. I mean, let's assume the drug will get better, will minimize side effects and in time. But what I'm saying is all of us understand that these self-destructive behaviors are not good.
Why do we assume that?
Tucker just said, I think there clearly are demonic forces. I think there are evil spirits that are doing this to people. Again, I never thought that Christians actually believed that demons were still picking on humans in today's modern world. But apparently, Tucker Carlson has shown me that evil spirits are still very much guiding people's moral compasses. I feel like I am a medieval monk copying out scripture right after the Black Death has struck all of Europe, listening to this interview.
Like, where's that moral framework come from
Yeah.
if there's no God? I don't get that.
I mean, even the basics, like we just feel bad in the morning. We feel cloudy. We feel grumpy. We feel depressed. We feel anxious. And it's because we don't sleep well and we're stressed and we eat terrible food and we don't exercise. So like, we don't do the positive things. We know we feel great when we do it, and we do the bad things that make us feel bad continually. So we all just know intuitively that this
we
acts.
do. I'm not. Of course, and we all feel that way. I felt that way this morning, actually. Funny you mentioned it. But I wonder if it's not reductionist to assume that they're all biological in cause, and so maybe there's a spiritual component. Maybe I'm not living my life the right way. Maybe I have done wrong and haven't repented of it. I mean, there are other potential causes. No,
Agreed.
This is just rich. I have definitely heard Christians say this before, and I have already made some content on this. But Tucker asks, like, where's that moral framework coming from if there's no God? I don't get that. Objectivism! Okay, to further elaborate, the entire point of having a philosophy like objectivism is to provide that secular moral code for man. It frees us from the notion that morality has to come from God or some higher power that is not truly human. Of course, Ayn Rand believed that we must still have a moral code. Otherwise, anarchy or dictatorship would ensue as it did in both world wars, and that would not lead to happy lives, only more death and destruction than ever before. What is so sad to see is that neither of these middle-aged men can understand where morality comes from when the answer has been so clearly shared with the world since at least when Atlas Shrugged was initially published in 1957. By the way, Tucker was born in 1969 and Brian in 1977, which means that they both were born with the advantage of having her knowledge disseminated out there since birth.
And this is what I'm suggesting, that no matter where someone is coming from, whatever your origin, the game to play as a species right now, in this moment, is don't die. Right now, we play capitalism and make money and earn.
I'm with you there. That's obviously a hollow, stupid dead end, and it's not actually even working.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's not working by its own terms. It's not working, right? You don't have a middle class anymore, so clearly that's not working, right? I couldn't agree with you. I couldn't agree with your skepticism more when you conclude that, like, the current program is absurd. Clearly it is. We need a better way. But I do think it's like at the core of your assumptions is an unanswered question, which is, why is living better than dying? Why do people seek to kill themselves? Like, what the hell is going on there?
Yeah.
Why?
Yeah. I mean, so I have gone through my life in a series of moments that has led me to distrust almost everything, including my mind. So initially, growing up in a religion.
Wise.
I mean, I grew up in a religion, and then I found out that that entire thing had been packaged in a way where it's like, we're good and everyone else is bad. And then I went through a process of behavioral psychology where I realized that I have all these shortcuts of hypocrisy and irrationality, that I am a disaster as a human.
Yes.
I'm blind to my own behavior. I went through it with authorities that I trusted in other ways. And so I don't know what to trust in reality outside of, things that I find more stable, like physics and math. And so if I try to ground myself in reality of what can I trust, my mind is very far down the list of things I trust.
I agree.
And so when I pose the question to myself of, do I want to live or do I want this or that? I don't trust what I have to say ever. And so I don't know, are we really the authority on what we want? Have we ever been accurate in making those guesses?
Brian then says, right now we play capitalism and make money and earn. And Tucker cuts him off with, "I'm with you there. That's obviously a hollow, stupid, dead end, and it's not actually even working," and then proceeds to maniacally laugh again. This is the man who is one of the top voices of the Republican Party, and he just dismissed capitalism as a hollow, stupid, dead end? Why doesn't he just stand up and make out with Marx right now? To this entire answer, I will scream, "Read Capitalism, the Unknown Ideal." Here's just a taste of the book's answer. The moral justification of capitalism does not lie in the altruist claim that it represents the best way to achieve the common good. It is true that capitalism does, if that catchphrase has any meaning, but this is merely a secondary consequence. The moral justification of capitalism lies in the fact that it is the only system consonant with man's rational nature, that it protects man's survival qua man, and that its ruling principle is justice.
Making those guesses.
No.
So why would
And I have to say, I disagree, I think, very strongly with your conclusions, but I so admire the way you're reaching them, because I think the root of wisdom is knowing not to trust yourself. I always say to my kids that the one guy I don't trust is me.
Yeah.
because it's true.
Yeah.
And so I really admire your honesty. You seem like you're coming at this as honestly as you possibly can.
Again, they circle back around to spit on the mind. Then Tucker states the root of wisdom is knowing not to trust yourself. I had to think for a while where he even got this premise. It sounds very Eastern, very mystical, though I'm sure Christianity contributes to some of this attitude as well. This debate is a very old one in philosophy between the mystics of spirit and the mystics of muscle. Ayn Rand addresses this by explaining, as products of the split between man's soul and body, there are two kinds of teachers of the morality of death: the mystics of spirit and the mystics of muscle, whom you call the spiritualists and the materialists, those who believe in consciousness without existence, and those who believe in existence without consciousness. Both demand the surrender of your mind, one to their revelations, the other to their reflexes. No matter how loudly they posture in the roles of irreconcilable antagonists, their moral codes are alike, and so are their aims. In matter, the enslavement of man's body; in spirit, the destruction of his mind. The good, say the mystics of spirit, is God, a being whose only definition is that he is beyond man's power to conceive, a definition that invalidates man's consciousness and nullifies his concepts of existence. The good, say the mystics of muscle, is society, a thing which they define as an organism that possesses no physical form, a superbeing embodied in no one in particular, and everyone in general except yourself. Man's mind, say the mystics of spirit, must be subordinated to the will of God. Man's mind, say the mystics of muscle, must be subordinated to the will of society. Man's standard of value, say the mystics of spirit, is the pleasure of God, whose standards are beyond man's power of comprehension and must be accepted on faith. Man's standard of value, say the mystics of muscle, is the pleasure of society, whose standards are beyond man's right of judgment and must be obeyed as a primary absolute. The purpose of man's life, say both, is to become an abject zombie who serves a purpose he does not know for reasons he is not to question. His reward, say the mystics of spirit, will be given to him beyond the grave. His reward, say the mystics of muscle, will be given on earth to his great-grandchildren. Selfishness, say both, is man's evil. Man's good, say both, is to give up his personal desires, to deny himself, renounce himself, surrender. Man's good is to negate the life he lives. Sacrifice, cry both, is the essence of morality, the highest virtue within man's reach. Both men are preaching a morality of death here and not of life. They are agreeing so much because their premises are the same. Selfishness is the ultimate evil.
But anyway, whatever. I have a lot of thoughts, but I don't mean to interrupt you. So, what would happen if people lived forever?
Yeah.
Why would that be good? I mean, the accumulated sadness of life is hard to take.
Yeah.
Do you talk to old people at all?
I do.
Yeah. And so there is like ships in a harbor, barnacles
Yeah.
attach, and the weight of that over time becomes immense.
Yeah.
And, memories, and there's just a lot in the human life that is hard. And again, it accumulates. And so why would you want to extend that?
So imagine we travel back in time 1 million years.
Yes.
And we're hanging out with Homo erectus.
Yes.
They have an axe in their hand.
Yes.
And we say, where's shelter? Where's food? And where's danger? We listen. If we say now wax poetic on the future of the species, what is the future of intelligence? We laugh. They have nothing to say about computers or the internet, or that there's a microscopic world, or how large the universe is. They have no idea. And in this moment, if we contemplate that we may be just as primitive as Homo erectus, we think we are at the apex of intelligence. Is that true? We're giving birth to superintelligence. Could that intelligence, relative to us, make us caveman-like in a similar fashion, or more so? And this is what I'm saying in this moment. It's a absolute invitation for humility, that we may know nothing about existence, or very little, or that what's coming our way may transform existence to ways that we can't even fathom. That's how significant the change is going to be in the coming years and decades. It's unfathomable to us.
Then Tucker drops another revealing sentiment that many Christians seem to share. I mean, the accumulated sadness of life is hard to take. Look, I grew up with enough childhood trauma for a lifetime, but does that mean that I would rather not exist? No. I have always accepted the anxiety and grief that came with my struggles, but there was still laughter and love in my life to get me through those tough times. There were many times I vowed that I desired to keep feeling than feel nothing at all, because the feelings themselves could not kill me. I mean, if everyone living in this place called heaven were to be there in eternal bliss, then they would end up being simply numb to their bliss. Their afterlife would then have no meaning if they just existed up there in this kind of stasis. No, I prefer to live and breathe with the understanding that loss and grief are a part of life, but so is laughter and joy.
This is one of those interesting conversations I've had in a while, because you're saying things that I think are almost beautiful in their wisdom. This is an invitation to humility. Yes, all of life is an invitation to humility. That's the root of wisdom and the root of happiness. But then your conclusion is, let's live forever. I don't.
No. The conclusion is, don't die. That's it. That is the sole objective. And so I want to live tomorrow. I've got stuff going on tomorrow. I'm excited about tomorrow.
Yeah.
So it's not to live forever. It's this, because we understand things on these short time frames. And humans will do things like, a person doesn't want to die when walking across the street, but they'll smoke a cigarette while doing so.
I've done it, yeah.
So we have these really weird behaviors where we don't want to die, just not now.
Yeah, I wish, and I'll stop with this, but I just wish we had a better handle on why we have those impulses. I feel like it's very hard to proceed with any assumption at all until we understand what just happened, or what's happening now, why we're acting the way that we are. And if we don't have a consensus on why people hurt themselves, pretty hard to make any future plans at all based on human behavior.
I do wonder, though, if we could actually look at a self-destruction score across time, would our time and place have a disproportionately high level because of how effective food companies are at addicting us to their food?
There's no question.
How good drug companies are at making drugs, and how social media that we basically are in this dystopic capture.
It's totally true.
Of self-destruction.
It's 100% true. Of course. I mean, I'm not that much older than you are. We both grew up in a country that was nowhere near this self-destructive. I mean, you grew up in a Mormon community in Utah, not particularly self-destructive people, actually.
Right.
And I mean that as a high compliment. But the whole country was less self-destructive. Of course, we respond to our circumstances, our environment, and animals do too. You cage them, they kill each other. I mean, I get it.
Yeah.
But the impulse may be exacerbated in certain periods by the environment, but the impulse is constant through time.
Yeah.
All of life is an invitation to humility. That is the root of wisdom and the root of happiness. What? Humility is certainly a part of Christianity, where a follower of Christ must kneel down and obey and not question the laws of nature. I cannot and will not accept that mentality. Humility, or in another way, the idea of selflessness, is not at the root of happiness or wisdom. Happiness comes from the values you accumulate in your life and feels like this stable state of being because you followed reality and its rules. And wisdom comes from not obeying the laws of the Bible, but having the courage and pride, the self-esteem, to go searching for truth.
Okay, so let's ask this through another frame. Here's a thought experiment for you. So if you had access to an algorithm that could give you the best physical, mental, and spiritual health of your life, but in exchange for that, you needed to follow the algorithm's suggestions. Go to bed on time when it said, go to bed when it said, eat what it said. Would you say yes, or would you say no?
Of course I would say no. I'm not getting bossed around by a machine. Sorry. And I also don't think that any philosophy that doesn't include God can improve my spiritual health, because, like, what does that even mean? What does that mean, actually? How can your spiritual health improve if you don't acknowledge the supernatural?
Yeah, so I've been holding dinners at my house for the past couple of years. I get 10 to 12 people together, and I pose this question, and then we have a 2.5-hour dialogue about the future of existence. And your response is perfect, because you told me no way you're doing it, and you gave me a list of things.
I'm not letting the toaster oven boss me around either. Just not.
Now, so what's interesting is the next question I ask in this conversation is, now imagine the 25th century is observing our conversation right now, and they observe your answers. What do they observe are the characteristics and morals and ethics of the early 21st century. So it flips people's mindset from the knee-jerk reaction of, I hate this idea, to being observational on what are the characteristics of being human now. And I do this because it is so hard to see time and place. We look at the 15th century.
That's right. No, I agree.
Very clear and clean. We're like, oh, they're idiots for this, and like maybe they were onto this. But we have this blindness to ourselves in this moment.
Yes.
And so we have to do these thought experiments, because you have to tease yourself out very slowly. People's responses, like, they tell me they experience multiple existential crises in that dinner. They dip down, they come back up for air, dip back down, come back up. It's a really challenging experience, because it challenges everything you understand about existence.
Do people keep accepting your dinner invitations? I mean, if I know that I'm going to eat at Brian's house but have an existential crisis before the entree is served, that's a lot.
People say it's one of, if not the most consequential conversations of their entire life.
Okay, then Brian Johnson offers up this thought experiment to Tucker Carlson, who swiftly rejects it and says, of course I would say no. I'm not getting bossed around by a machine. Sorry. And I also don't think that any philosophy that doesn't include God can improve my spiritual health, because, like, what does that even mean? Objectivism. This is so frustrating, to be yelling at a screen with no one to hear me. There is a philosophy that does not include God and makes a heck of a lot more sense than any other system of ideas I have ever read about, even after getting my bachelor's in philosophy. Tucker is so far gone that there is no way of changing this man's mind at his age, unfortunately. I think that Brian's theory is definitely going to be appealing to the younger crowd, even if he needs a better philosophy backing his desire for this giving birth to superintelligence. Well, my dear watchers and listeners, I didn't realize before just how much I had to interject into this interview, so I've decided to split this into 2 parts. Please watch out for part 2 soon. Thanks for joining me this month on the Atheist Nun channel. If you found value in this show, please like it, subscribe to my channel, and consider supporting me on AmericanWordsmith.com, where you can buy my novels, The Paper Pusher, The Dormant Age, A Man of Silence, and A Man of Action. Be sure to tune in next month for a new episode. Take care.